May I request our panelist and author, to come up on the stage. I also request, since everybody carries a cell phone, may we request you to switch off your phones, flight mode, silent, whatever. The music is pleasing, but not always. It will be great pleasure to welcome all of you. Of course, our author, Amiya Chandra, our panelist, David Raskina, Managing Director of the Exim Bank, Professor Harsh Pant, who's both a distinguished, what are you, Harsh? Distinguished? You're very distinguished, I know. At the Observer Research Foundation, and basically from the Department of Defense Studies at King's College London, and Professor K.P. Vijayalakshmi from JNU. She's chairperson of the Center for American Studies, so Canada, USA, Latin America, the whole works. This is a very unusual book in the sense that I will not speak too much on the book right now, except to tell you that it basically such a quick time to get a feel of how the Trump administration will work out, is working out, and how we should do about it. As I said, I will not talk about the book right now, except to say that it's an interesting book at a very good time, and I think something which policymakers and analysts should definitely read. Let me first begin by asking the author, Amiya Chandra, who has written many books, but this is a book on trade, and this is a book, trade is something he has dealt with for a very, very long time. I first ran into him in 1996 at the Commerce Ministry when both of us were there. 1996 is actually a generation plus ago. It sounds just 21 years ago. Look at what has happened since then. It seems actually 100 years ago. So Amiya, would you like to come and say some things? The sequence we'll follow is, first Amiya will speak on the book, about 7 to 10 minutes, Amiya. Yes. Authors like to talk about the books. I want to warn him in advance that 7 to 10 minutes is what we're looking at, after which we'll formally launch the book, and then I'll request the panelists to speak up, and then I'll regulate, and then we'll have Q&A. So Amiya, over to you for your 9 minutes.
My most respected boss, second boss to be precise, Sri Shakti Sinha, and most loved boss, even though I worked with him for 6 months only, Sri David Raskina, Managing Director, Exim Bank, Professor Pant, and my colleague, my friend, and my senior, not only from academic point of view, but we were in the same students' organization, Free Thinkers, when I was in JNU. So I have a very deep, abiding relationship with Vijay, whom I call with lots of love, Vijayalakshmi, who is a big name today. He's the chairperson of America, Canada, North America. All my colleagues, friends, media persons. In fact, I would like to give a very brief introduction of the book, and the format is that after that we can open it to the question and answer. On January 20th, 2017, Donald J. Trump was sworn in as the 45th President of the United States of America, replacing Barack Obama, and the swearing in was done by John Roberts. It was a bitterly contested election. It was a bitterly contested election in the sense that not only it was a clash of two different personalities, but also on the reason which had deep implication on USA, its allies, and the entire world. He fought on a plank of anti-Obama policy, be it the healthcare, be it the internal security, international security, immigration, and the most important, foreign trade. So once he won, in March 2017, USTR released the Trade Policy Agenda 2017, which clearly said the new America First trade policy will make it more desirable for the companies to work here, to create the job here, to pay taxes here, and rebuild the economy. Now the America, which was the apostle of free trade, America, which was the apostle of the global economy, suddenly went into what critics called nationalistic and what others said jingoistic, or obscurantist, but he did not bother about it. What happened after that? He said that we will review NAFTA. He said that we will repeal Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement. He said that we will build a wall with Mexico. He said he used to say China is a currency manipulator. Mexico was rattled. So the India, which was on a honeymoon trip with USA, with both Mr. Obama and Mr. Modi declaring that we tend to build 500 billion US dollar trade by 2020, suddenly appeared a big distant dream. Today, we are at 20% of it, approximately 100 billion, and looks very unlikely that India and USA will be able to achieve it with the current situation. So the book is a very humble attempt to tell what is the way to accelerate and way forward. In fact, whomsoever I listened to, they said he's a bully, he's a bull in the China shop. You go to EU, there is a maximum resentment in Germany whenever I went there, or you go to China, there is a maximum resentment against Donald Trump. You know, they say that he's a person you cannot talk to. But if you see very closely, there is a method in his madness. And in this book, I have tried to see what is the method in his madness. He has, in fact, co-edited a book, co-authored a book, and that book is The Art of Deal. That's a classic book. He says that book is next to Bible to him. And in that book, The Art of the Deal, he says that what is the deal making? He says politics is also a deal making. And if he says politics is a deal making, he says the principle which I apply to be a successful deal maker as a realtor, I'm going to apply to my politics also. Now, what were the deals? First thing he said, be flexible. He said that every time I have 100 balls in the air, I will at least catch one, and if few of them fall in my lap, that's bonus. So he says, keep the ball in the air. And that's why he says that I try to rattle a nation by 30 options and 30 statements. He said China is a currency manipulator, and when he says that he accepted the phone from the Taiwanese president, and when he called up Chinese president refused to accept the call. Then he had to retract, and he had to say that, all right. Suddenly, China gave, as it is being alleged, 3 patents to Ivana Trump, and China was not a currency manipulator. China became a very sweet person. So multiple flexible options he had. Look, so the first thing which he says is the be flexible. Second thing he says, know your market. What is to be market? आपके सामने कौन बैठा हुआ है? जब तक till the time you do not know who is in front of you, you cannot do the proper marketing with him. So what Canadian president do? He went and bullied Canada. So he said all trade sanctions, they are taking away. There is adverse trade balance. So the Canadian president went and said, yes, we agree with you, sir. There is no trade. Can we start a women entrepreneur exchange program? He says, women? Yeah, that seems interesting. And that's how everything started with Canada. So, you know, so you have to read his mind. He can be tackled. That's what I'm trying to say. Third part which he says is that protect the downslide, upside will take care of itself. He says that people say that think for the best. I say think for the worst. If you think for the worst, then at least something better than that will happen. And that's why you have to go with that attitude. Now, when you read his mind, then you must understand that he's sitting with you and with a face that he's prepared for the worst. Whatever comes out, that's a bonus. Or he says that maximize your options. Now, what is happening with India? Let's say in pharmaceuticals. In pharmaceutical, USA is saying that India is basically looting on intellectual property. And that's the maximum bone of contention between India and the USA. This book proposes that we need to build up a multi-tiered policy. What will be a multi-tiered policy? Now, that's a fact that India is a big market. That's a fact that once the patent expires, generic drug in India starts building, why can't we have a collaboration and work it out where it can be a tiered pricing for India and other countries? And that's the way, in fact, the US person, the Indian person, the patient protection group, everybody can join together and fix up the price. And that's how there has to be a collaboration between India and the USA. In fact, I have written lots of things, but what I'm trying to say now in a very short period is that if you have to deal with USA, then you have to know that you have to deal in a new manner. And in this book, what I have suggested is there need to be a new structure in the place. With the current structure, where we have some inquiry comes, we just pass it on, we cannot do it. USA has 50 states, and out of these 50 states, if you could know that India has presence leading in only one state. Canada is leading in 22 states. China is leading in 13. So that's the reason that India, in spite of so much, and USA exports to India is USA's percentage, the position is 18th. So India is the 18th country in terms of list of priority with just 2% of USA exports. And that too, between 2015 and 2016, there is a gap of 25 billion. That is adverse payment. That is, that India has positive balance of payment. Now what America is saying, that this is adverse balance of payment, we are going to bulldoze you, otherwise you bridge the gap. In this book, I have pointed out that what are the gaps which can be bridged. I have pointed out that we can have training of trainers, we can have grading of exporters, GIA, marketing, promotion, and in the last, I have pointed out that how we can move the needle in terms of service sector. And in the service sector, there is a big list. The list includes G2G, government to government, that is, that where is the state government and the central government. We are going to implement GST. We really do not know what will be the mechanism. GSTN is there, but GSTN, whether it will work completely or there can be any further extension of that. Or then there is a state government and the provincial government. And all these sectors need to be, the USA has a very robust technology in that case. Or in government to government, we can also have the linkages between the two countries. Then there is a government to citizen, water, electricity, sanitation, health, telecom, and there is a G2B, government to business, insurance, banking. There can be US and Indian cooperation maximum in this regard. India has told USA in the defense sector, now USA is the first defense partner, but there is airlines maintenance, there is banking insurance, engineering architecture, tourism, hospitality, health, wellness, medical, accounting, auditing, and legal services where USA can cooperate in a great manner with India. And this will not only help to bridge the adverse balance of payment, but also create a robust infrastructure in India from where the bilateral trade can go in a multiple manner. I will not take much of a time as I have just to go. 9 minutes I have been told, but during the question answer session, as Sir has pointed out, we can deal with the specific questions in this regard. But my conclusion is that Donald J. Trump is not someone who cannot be handled. His basic strategy is muddle the water, then allow it to settle down and see that what all you gain. You have to be patient in dealing with him, you have to be personal in dealing with him, and you have to be clever in dealing with him, where he must get the feeling that means America is going to gain out of this deal as well, if India is gaining as well. It should be a win-win game for both the countries. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Amiya. Now it gives me great pleasure to invite on the stage Rajan Arya, the publisher, Pentagon Press. And since he's edited two of the books that I have edited, he has published it. I must say an extremely professional publishing house. So Rajan, please come and join us, and we can formally release the book. Clap again. Thank you, Raj. Thank you, Rajan, for that. Before I ask our speakers to take on, really, their version, I just thought I'll speak for a few minutes, actually a couple of minutes only. I don't know if there's anybody who's from Tamil Nadu who was an adult, semi-adult in the 70s and the 80s here in the audience. Anybody from, any Tamilian here who really, there you are. Now, the very strong Dravid movement, I'll not go into the split, happened, and then In 77, MGR comes to power. He wins election again in 1980, and till he dies, he remains in power. So the Dravid movement had very strong ideologues. Karunanidhi was one of them. Annadurai, of course, very famous. Neduncheri and others were there. MGR was attached to the movement, but never known as an ideologue. Very obvious reasons. His job was to use the screen to push the idea of the Dravid movement. He was asked, as Chief Minister in the Assembly, then at Fort St. George, what is your ideology? Now, MGR was class 3 pass, but a street smart person, a very successful politician, so obviously knew what he was doing. And MGR's answer was very clear. I think if you see this movie called Nadodi Mannan, now here he's a cartman, Belgadi Chalata, who becomes a king. And he sings a famous song, Standing Up. He's not sitting like a cartman. He's standing up and singing this song and telling what would he do if he was the king. I'll look after the poor, I'll do this, I'll do that. The MGR says, that is my ideology. Now, why do I mention MGR? Donald Trump says the same thing which Amiya just referred. Read my book, The Art of the Deal. I am a deal maker. You want to know who I am? I'm neither Republican nor a Democrat, definitely not a conservative. If anything, Donald Trump is a conservative, no, he is not a conservative. He can be a reactionary, but he can't be a conservative. So that is, how across the spectrum you can see. Now, China, of the American market, American imports, 22% of the goods come from China. We are 2%. See the scale difference. We think we are a global powerhouse in information technology, the service exports, which we are. We are among the top 5 or 6 in the world. Well, our share of the global market is 3.1%. So India is, let us be very frank, a very, very minuscule player. The H1B visas, as we found out, the total number amounts to 0.006% of the American workforce. And yet it has become such a big deal. Because in the world of politics, and economics cannot exist without the world of politics. Economics is not a science like physics. The two go together. In the world of politics, you have to. And I think Amiya has done that exceedingly well in the book, how he has taken different parts of the book. And then, of course, most of the book is about what Prime Minister Modi is talking about, the ease of doing business, make in India, skilling India. He does a lot of that. But he also explains in very great detail, and how do you handle Trump, how to get personal. And if Prime Minister Modi had ever taken my advice, of course, why should he take my advice? I'm not the foreign secretary or somebody. I would have recommended that on 30th of January, he would have called up Trump, Mr. President, so good to see you in office. Been waiting for you. I want to drop in 2 days' time and say hello to you. In the sense that, and then build on. That's not good enough, of course, because deal makers look for something more than that. But at least as a measure of building, because Trump, unlike all of us, everybody thought that once you're in office, you follow the rules of the game. He's very, very clear. The State Department is there, fine, but I do my own foreign policy. The USTR is there, fine, listens to me, but ultimately So he is not a man who's going to bother about structures. Alvin Toffler in 1970 said that in the new world, pyramidal structures in business will be replaced by flat structures, and use a word called adhocracy. Ad hoc groups will be formed to do actions. The action is over, the group is dissolved. So Trump is actually working on those lines. I don't think he has read Alvin Toffler, but he's actually working on those lines. Having said that, as I said, I've taken 1 minute more than my couple of minutes. Let me ask now, David, you're a man of the trade. You've been in Exim Bank for a long time. You've seen things go up, down. Where do you think we are going with Trump, and where does your book fit to this thing?
Thanks. What really struck me about Amiya's book and what you just brought in the philosophy, economics started as political economy. Today, what Amiya has done is probably, I would call it psychoeconomy, because you've really dissected what the mind of Donald Trump is and how to approach it. It reminds me a bit of what Mr. Jaishankar, the foreign secretary, said at an event in Mumbai. He says, don't demonize Trump, analyze him. And the reference to his book, The Art of the Deal, is perfect because this is a New York style of negotiation, which you also see in Germany, for example. It's an in-your-face, aggressive negotiation. But at the end of the day, the deal is struck. As long as the deal is struck, everybody's happy, and that just seems to be exactly what Trump is looking at. So I think this psychosocial approach is something which makes a lot of sense in the present world.
And do you think going forward, we would be in a position to defend our interests, particularly the points he raised about IPR? To me, H1B, we should not really be stressing too much for. I actually see it as a blessing in disguise. If we're forced to move away from body shopping into doing something more validation, it's actually good for India. But actually in terms of IPR, which is where really the meat of the matter is, you really think we'll be able to?
I think so, because as you rightly said, there's nothing conservative about Trump. He's a deal maker. And the way the healthcare industry in the USA is functioning and the way the costs of healthcare are going, there is an increasing shift towards generics. In fact, you're actually seeing a situation where Indian pharma companies, which made money on generics, are now seeing the price collapse quicker. So I think after a couple of years, you'll find both Indian pharma and US pharma pretty much on the same page. The few people who are there in core research on biosimilars will be always the outliers, but the mass market is going to come here. So I don't see IPR as a major stretch. On IT, I fully agree with you. In fact, this is where we need to give some numbers to Trump. And if I, as a true banker, if I can throw some numbers here, you know, over the last 5 years, Indian IT companies paid something like $22.5 billion to the US Treasury as tax revenues. In Social Security, it was about 6.6 billion US dollars. Investment, close to $2.5 billion in the last 3 years. 410,000 US jobs, that's almost 500,000 jobs, were supported by the Indian IT industry. Even if you just look at the visa fees for H1B and L1 visas, that was about 375 million. So while you might be a small and literally a pinprick in the employment scenario, what we need to be looking at is, look, what is the revenue generation? And this is a number which would really appeal to Trump.
That's very interesting because especially, and before I go on to Harsh, you know the 6 billion that David talked about, the social security taxes that is collected if you work in the USA, the fact is our H1B fellows who are paying this tax and the employees are paying the tax are not going to derive 1 cent in benefit from it. It's actually a gift. It's actually a gift. It's actually a grant from the Indians. Harsh, Harsh's expertise on broadly India's foreign policy and strategic moves are absolutely legendary, and I love reading him all the time. Harsh, tell us, how really do you think, you demonize your best friends, Germany, Japan, South Korea, India, and after demonizing China, China becomes your best buddy. This is just in short, but otherwise, how do you look at it overall?
Well, I think first let me congratulate Amiya for writing this book, because I think he has done something with which all of us are struggling. Just to understand the man, and is there a method to that madness, or is there all madness? I don't think we have achieved a consensus on that. Amiya makes a point that there is a method. I think when he began, I was slightly more optimistic, because if you see from January to March, the sort of pronouncements that he had made were, and this I'm talking of largely foreign and security policy here, they seem to be adhering to the sort of conventional wisdom that, all right, he's not, for example, breaking up the NAFTA, he's not now talking of NATO is not obsolete. But I think since then, and sort of the sort of pressures that on surrounding him at the moment, where domestically his whole project is being paralyzed by the Russia question. How does an administration that is so paralyzed, how does it make any move or anything? And I think that's a question that all of us who believe in American, who believe in the value that America gives in terms of sustaining the economic order, the political order, should really be worried about. Because if the sort of situation that drip by drip by drip by drip, the sapping of authority from the presidency that is happening in yesterday's television proceedings were an example, if that continues for another 6 months, then I think we are in for a period where it's not only going to be turbulence, but I think it's going to be free for all. And there, for a country like India that is now making an argument that, look, we are a global rules holder, we believe in these rules that have been set up, climate change being one of them, globalization being the other, and we want, because it has been beneficial for us. And I think that's, for countries like India, then it's a real challenge. How do we, because we are not China, and certainly we cannot at this point shape the sort of rules that China is shaping in its own direction. So we rely on the leverage that countries like America provide to us. And if we have a leadership there that is so consumed by the domestic aspect of the administration, its foibles, then I think we are in for troubled times. Now, just going back to the question in terms of when he started off, I think my argument as an analyst or as a student of international relations was that eventually structures will win out. And eventually he will make an argument, he'll see the balance of power changing in Asia, he'll see that NATO is needed. Some of the things he's seeing, and he's getting to that point where he's starting to articulate. So after a long time, there was a lot of concern that he has stopped freedom of navigation in South China Sea. Suddenly we see that that's happening now. But the issue there is that what we have seen in the last 3 or 2 months is that he's again back to, at times, to the whimsical arrangements on his dealings with Europe, for example. There, I don't see any method, I only see madness. And as you see, as you say, you know, what do you do with Germany? I mean, Germany is one country where there is no need to annoy Angela Merkel. Why would you do that? It's a country that's sustaining European Union at this point in time. Now, he has done that deliberately, he has been doing that provocatively, and there is nothing that he's going to gain from that. Because I don't see any transaction happening there. What is the transaction? What is the deal that he's going to strike? So I think the problem with personalities like Donald Trump is that if everything is so personalized, then, you know, if you don't look at him properly, if you don't shake hands with him properly, if you don't say, sir, so you are so great, then you are in a situation where this sort of demands that will be made on you get very, very extreme. So I think at this point, we'll have to sort of look at Mr. Modi's trip and hope that perhaps he's able to generate the rapprochement, that the personal rapport that is needed, so that the Indo-US relations can be brought back to a situation where at least we are talking sanely, sensibly about issues that matter to us, rather than, you know, as was mentioned earlier, rather than using India as a cover story for something that he already wants to do. He wanted to get out of climate change, and I'm told that one of the reasons he got out of climate change was that, of Paris Agreement, was that when he went to G7, the G7 ganged up, what he saw was the G7 ganging up against me. And he didn't like that, the pushback. And so he said, I will push back harder. And so he said, all right, I'm renouncing, I'm getting out of climate change. And I think if the behavior becomes, like this, then I think for a country like India, which really, in my opinion, has been very defective in terms of making a transactional argument vis-a-vis the US for various reasons. We don't like that. We are not culturally attuned to that. And I think there the problem comes, how do you make the strategic argument which is losing vitality in the American establishment? America will no longer make an argument that, and is no longer making an argument that the rise of India is good for America. Those voices are being silenced, and therefore now we are moving to a stage where transactional issues have to be put on the table. So one can only hope that we have those transactional issues sorted out amongst ourselves, and I think that's where Amiya's book is great, because he lays down very categorically what India can and cannot do. And I think in that sense, perhaps when Mr. Modi goes, he can read this book, and perhaps when he sits across Mr. Donald Trump, he has some bright ideas to share.
Provoked by something, not provoked, it is the train of thought by what you were saying. Look at East Asia, North Asia. I mean, the fact that Trump allowed China to equate North Korea's behavior with American behavior, when he sends those ships and says that, oh, both of you are getting excited, let me see that both of you are. I mean, for us it looks far away. Practically it isn't far away, How North Korea behaves and how America allows itself in that sense to be treated as a rogue party there would have tremendous bearing on the South China Seas and onto now the OBOR or the bar for whatever syndrome, And leaving Trump aside as a moment, how do you think we can really, try to make the best out of...
Well, I think there are, some of the things, for example, that Amiya points out in his book, which is that at a fundamental level, the issues are more about us. that we, and this is a point that I think some in India are already starting to make, that we missed a golden period when the going was so good for India and India was so hesitant to do certain things. Now, when we are back in the transactional phase, then then you end up into these issues where numbers will be disputed. So we will give some numbers, look, we contribute so much to your economy. They'll say, no, 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 it's that. And I think in that transactional mode, we lose the larger picture. So here, when as you're pointing out, for us, when the critical question is how the balance of power is being shaped in our neighborhood, for that, that's essential survival question for us. For America, and given America's domestic disruption at this point, that's not a vital question. They're ceding leadership on issue after issue, and they don't care. Perhaps that's the politics of it. That's the kind of politics that will happen in America, not only in America, in the Western world. We see what is happening in Britain today. I mean, if you think about it, such large questions of nationhood, such large questions of national interest, and yet Britain is veering from one crisis to another. They've not been able to vote in one direction. So I think societies are changing in the West, the political affiliations are changing, and that domestic disruption is having an impact on foreign policy. And I don't think we have yet assessed where we would go, because we are working from a template, the template that has been given to us by Donald Trump's predecessors. And that template was, all right, India may not give us much, but India's rise is good because that's the strategic prism that they had for Asia. Donald Trump it seems that he doesn't care at this point. Or if he cares, we'll find out in a few months' time. But it's very unlikely to me that given his make America strong or more jobs for Americans, those sorts of catch-all phrases that he uses, for him, therefore, politically, he will need to show that, I have achieved these many jobs. I have achieved, this for you. And there, India's contribution, unless we start articulating it powerfully, unless we start articulating it very, very diligently, I think we will be lost in the din. Because there are so many issues on the table which he's facing from one crisis to another. And then on top of that, his domestic credentials remain very, very difficult to manage.
Professor Jalakshmi, I mean, you know the American system very well. So I'll request you both on the, as I said, thank you for the music, but could we do without it? You know both on the domestic side. I mean, I can't remember any US president's administration unraveling within its honeymoon period. Now, whether it actually unravels or whether he pulls out some magic and survives, the way the ability of the US president now to shape the narrative within the United States at a time when his party controls the Hill, it's a very unusual kind of a situation. Going forward, how do you think the American internal politics, in terms of their priorities to get the economy going again, would really work out in this kind of a scenario? So that would be my first kind of a thing, and later I'll come back to the Americas.
Okay, thank you. And let me congratulate the author, because that's, I think, the first thing, first order of the day. And I think Amiya's book, to me, is particularly interesting, not just because we were fellow travelers years ago, we still are in many ways, because I'm very, very cheered by his optimism throughout the book. And I think I want to spend half a minute on, before I get to the stuff that I talk about every day for my bread and butter. Amiya's book has started, I hope, a trend, because I'm looking at, in political science, I know this is a death knell, when you talk theory, but there is a revival of interest in examining leaders and why they take certain decisions. And one of the theories I am very fond of is the polyheuristic theory. So this heuristic approach, which you called as a psychoanalysis, the psycho word sounds a little exciting. But what I really appreciated about his work is, I think, the cognitive lens that he uses to look at leadership, political leadership, and the decisions that they make, and he has tried to decode the decision-making environment. And this is of immense value for both policymakers and for people who want to study foreign policy or the politics of any nation. Now, a change certainly has happened since Trump came, and so he begins very nicely with the elections and all of that. But to my mind, I'm answering your question now. These crises are periodical in the US body politic. There have been extreme candidates who have come up. Not many of them have come this far, and not even one of them has been able to give this surprise victory to such an extent. However, the fact of having a same party on the Hill is again not new. Clinton had it for a few years. He couldn't do much. So there is a political system of the United States, I'd say, which is both, Congress and presidency share the kind of decisions that are made, especially on trade, especially on foreign policy, at least the conduct of it, which means, paisa, who will give the money to, fight the war, who will declare the war, that sort of thing. So the system being what it is it an advantage to Mr. Trump that he has Republicans? Now, you saw the way he came up, and, all of us here, at least, we've been writing or talking about how he seems to be an outsider amongst outsiders. Even Republican Party, I mean, he's not a traditional Republican at all. And you said he doesn't want to be conservative, and conservatives don't want him either, It's probably both ways. Now, given that part of it, is the Republican Party a gainer by this presidency or not? That's the real question they're all having to deal with. Now, some of the issues that he talks about is not really offbeat, as we like to think. Anything but Obama is a normal mantra, because when Mr. Bush came in, and I was at Texas A&M, and I tell you, anything but Clinton, ABC. So this is, every president who comes in does have this problem. But with Mr. Trump, he's also fighting his own party on several issues, because affordable, Obamacare and dismantling of it was the main plank of Republicans for years. State after state was coming forward with all of that. So he picked, I would say, strategically, a winner politically to say that this is what I'm going to do and Congress should support me. Of course, the Congress will support him because it's Republicans. They can't, cut off their nose to spite their faces. I hope you're getting what I'm saying. So that's one part of it. But the other part of it is, I think the retreat from globalization and liberalization, I think that's a real issue. I have, in my last visit to the United States, visited a number of malls, and who was buying? Indians. Not many others. You go to restaurants, you'll see more Indians. So there was a hurting. In 2008, it was worse. So there will be a resentment. Do you see? It's an anecdotal kind of thing. I'm not giving my typical lecture, but, there's going to be something, Amiya, when they say only Indians are able to do all this, and we just have to stand here and sell the pizzas to them. So, yeah, exactly. So, there is a...
And $66,000 is the Asian, $44,000 is the Americans.
That's right. So there you are. Yeah.
White
that-
Americans is against, the Indians are also Americans. They're not
Yeah,
Indians.
well, so when you talk about Indian diaspora, when you talk about how they see being Bangalored, again, Obama used that term. So, IT industry in the lens of political crosshairs, usual, nothing new. But what's new is Mr. Trump has said that there has been abuse of United States interests. And that's a new line, because he's also flinging back on his inaugural day. He said that I think all these guys have contributed for America's landslide downwards. Those were all former presidents in his inaugural. So that's a different kind of persona, and therefore I applaud your effort to actually study the man and his cognitive, thinking and that lens, that cognitive lens, to understand how he is going to make a decision. The reason why it's also important for us, Amiya's book, is because it deals with trade, which is complex and it is interlinked. But I've always believed that economic logic often gives way to political expediency. I've said this on different occasions, and I believe it to be true now because I'm seeing it often and often. It's happening in India, it happens anywhere, especially in democracies. So I think politics for me will always be, the politics of trade would probably, your footnote to your book would be a small sort of section on politics of the trade. That would be interesting because the internecine fights between the USTR, the White House staff, and the presidency, that's what it looks like because he doesn't have the staff or the appointments, he hasn't made the appointments for the usual bureaucracy, federal bureaucracy. Adhocracy is probably quite rightly that what you described. So that's the point about their internal politics.
Though I wanted to speak on the America, especially Mexico and all that, but I'll leave that aside. Yeah, you're fine. You said that US presidents have not always got the way, even though their parties are on the hill, which is true. But the kind of polarization has taken place over 20 years. It's not one party responsible for it since the Clinton presidency. You don't have now a single northern New England Republican, say, of importance. Earlier you had that balancing factor on the hill. Now that has gone completely. And Clinton campaigned against NAFTA, not as much as Ross Perot did, but Clinton was also very, very strongly against NAFTA. When he actually came into office, Clinton actually, the reason the Republicans hate Clinton was he stole their damn agenda.
Exactly.
He balanced the budget.
Yes.
He pushed for trade opening.
He was like a Republican in Democratic.
Exactly.
And he said, don't mollycoddle the butchers of Beijing in his campaign.
Yes.
And he gave WTO to Beijing.
But so therefore,
in 2000 he gave China.
But as Harsh also pointed out, unlike Mr. Dean who went to Washington in '54 and got trapped by Washington, this man is very, very clear that I will not be trapped by Washington consensus, in the real Washington consensus sense, not the title sense. And therefore, he is actually trying to carry out all the campaign promises that he made. But the first rule of politician is, try to honor your campaign promises unless they're stupid, But this guy says, so what? That is what is,
differentiates him.
So
I do agree that he has been very clear about looking out for his constituents and his supporters. And even today, I read a small clip when I came. A small town in Ohio, Hillsborough, small town, and a small newspaper, which one of the 6 newspapers which endorsed him, till today supports him. Not because they are racist or Islamist. They also go through a lot of, the segregation saga, everything. But they're saying we support him because he's still listening to us. He's putting America first. So that resonates, and he's not letting that go. And I do think, therefore, his presidency is unusual. And he is, so far, keeping to speaking beyond the podium, so to speak. He's not confined to Washington and the Beltway. So he's speaking across to the nation. So I think that's the point. But if I can, just bring it to the, the book, I just want to.
yeah, please.
I just
And
want
then
to.
Harsh, of course, will have to.
Yeah. I think it's a mistake for us to cast Indo-US relations solely on the rise of China. I think that's something we need to say because, somehow, it has become like we'll compare our exports with them and everything. It's true. Reality check, everybody knows this. But it's not because China rises that Indo-US relations, we have had a confusing history, to say the least. But we've had a history, and in personal relationships, history matters. And he says, get personal, be patient, be planned, the 3 Ps of Amiya's advice to RPM. And be professional. So the 4th P. So you have 4 Ps, Mr. Modi, I hope he listens.
Somewhat contradictory, of course. Be personal and be professional. It's somewhat contradictory.
Well,
we'll go with it.
Japanese PM went to play golf with him. Then he conducted business. That's
like I said, I stopped without that. I said, be patient, be personal, and be planned. Being ambitious for India is a good thing, but we need to be strategic. So I think you need to also look at your defense trade because that is a very well established pillar. It does look like a one-legged wonder, as Nai says, and you also quote somewhere, that, you know, building without economic partnership, a strategic partnership may be like a one-legged pillar, you know. So this is something all of us, I think, agree. But I do feel that what you have is also something to be nurtured. And Mr. Mathis, General Mathis, is one of the finest officers who is interested in India, and I think it's very good to do business with him. And I think, therefore, defense trade initiative would have, I think, the second point of an open approach, etc. But India's strengths also should not be forgotten when we compare with China, especially because though we're doing BRICS and development banking and all of that, I think, you know, our approach to open governance, we tend to forget, we tend to take for granted a lot of things. But the way we approach Internet of Things or Internet, you know, we have great value when such is our belief in openness that, you know, cybersecurity can benefit from a person like us, not a person who controls Internet, who chokes off information highways, doesn't allow anyone to get information like China or even Russia to some extent. You know, these are problem areas. So BRICS being what they are, we may not be the economic powerhouse, but we have the potential to be acceptable far more, and we should believe in that. And the third final point for me is India's influence on things like climate change. I still believe that we are in the renewables. We are doing very well in the directions that we are. So we need to work on that trade, even though that's a problem for them. I think the disputed or figures, you know, that really comes into play in the solar panel issue. So renewable is, the congressional testimonies that I've read, it's a major issue. But I think public health also. We're doing great steps with this Clean India campaign. I'm very fond of that campaign. I think it's one of the best things that's ever happened to us. I know it's very pedestrian for the strategic thinking types, but it's so intrinsic, you know, for the impact we'll make around the world. I mean, it's amazing. And I have a young scholar who's looked at agricultural cooperation between India and also health, and the kind of work that we are doing in Africa in conjunction because of our training with USAID. It's unbelievable. So we have opportunities in government and in private houses, the leadership that we can eventually assume. We should prepare for the long game. That's my point. And finally, I'd say it's very easy. It's a mistake to cast India as a kind of alliance partner. US-India alliance may not be on the cards, but I think in the years to come, I predict that this is a sui generis relationship. It can get stronger, according to me.
Harsh, lots of what you said, I'm sure you would like to.
Yes, so I just wanted to, I think, 2 points. One was this point about rising, this, I think, narrative of global governance, where, I think the problem for countries like India is that we do not have the cachet like China has. So, for example, China is now talking of, the way they are defining cyber sovereignty. Now, we of course would not agree with it. And we would like someone to take the lead in defining those terms by which, on which we can agree with. But there, I think our reliance on other actors will now need to be reconsidered, because a lot of things are happening where, when, we used to instinctively say, all right, Americans would do it. A problem in Afghanistan, Americans would do it. Cyber norms, Americans would, global maritime norms, Americans would take care. I think in that sense, this is again a disruptive phenomena here, that he may not want to do it. In many cases, he would not, in fact, given his problems with the internet, he might even say, well, China, what do you think? We can come to an agreement on. So I think we need to then talk about these things more and more as to where India is and what sort of role India can play in shaping these narratives. The other point is about domestic politics, which I think Professor Vijayalakshmi mentioned, which is very interesting. See, traditionally our understanding of democracies was that if you see Tony Blair doing with Labour, if you see what to a certain extent, George Bush did with Republicans, David Cameron did with the Tories, bringing the median voter at the center, right? Bringing the voter, bringing politics to the center ground, so that you can win more votes. Now, what is, I don't see that there is an interest on the part of Donald Trump. He wants to revive his base. He wants to rouse that base. Everything he's doing is for his base. So while, there's a town, these small towns that have made him the president, what interest he has in talking of global governance for the coastal communities in America? No interest at all. His interest is that I have been made president by certain communities, by the Rust Belt in America, and therefore I would cater to their interests. So I think there is an interesting, as a political analyst also, this tells you something very interesting that is happening, that how do you win elections? And if this becomes the pattern of winning elections, then again I think its impact on foreign policy is going to be very, very different compared to the past. And we have not yet come to an understanding of what this dichotomy between domestic and foreign means.
So in which case I think, the old criticism of the Pakistan-US relationship, which was transactional, I think now in this circumstance, in this scenario, there's lots to say for having relationship instead of bothering about a larger game, David, do you want to tell us something? And I want to open it up to Q&A. I had a very patient audience, other than one little piece of music. Please.
Yeah, I just go back to psychology a little bit. I think Professor Vijayalakshmi covered that a little bit. The US is very, very strong on freedom. They may define it differently depending which part of the USA you go to, but there's a strong emphasis on individual freedom. And because of that, even when you look beyond transactions, there is a affinity with India because of the democracy. Call it what you like, call it maybe sentimental or whatever, but there is a certain amount of affinity and respect coming out of that, which frankly we don't leverage enough. The fact that we too are subject to elections, we too are subject to a government being changed, is something which they understand and appreciate, but we are not leveraging that enough over there. The other point, just on what Harsh just mentioned, you've always had a situation of a politician fighting a campaign which is catering to his base, triangulating back to the center once elected, because the goal was to be president of the country. You're now facing a situation where maybe the goal was just to get elected. So the goalposts have changed very dramatically, and I really have no idea how you're going to adjust to those revised goalposts.
Obviously, when you're a part of a regular political process, and please remember, this is the first elected office Donald Trump is. He has not even been ward councillor of Queens or something, so it's remarkable. And therefore, when you're not part of a political machine, you're not looking for the median, the median does not exist for you, it's irrelevant to you, right? So obviously, that is something, we should not be criticizing Trump as much as trying for us. Personally, whatever we think about Trump is absolutely your own business. I think as a country, we'll obviously have to be looking at analyzing it as Amiya has done so well. But obviously more has to be done. This is not simply not good enough. For the simple reason there's so much more to the relationships, so much more to global affairs, to really try to figure out, who's pulling the strings where, and where do I bring. Yes, India-US relationship cannot be predicated on China, which is true, but China did provide a catalyst which enabled both of us to finally shed, us particularly, to finally shed whatever baggage we were carrying unnecessarily, So, should we open it up? If the panelists are aware, let's open it up to... Yeah, please. Yeah, please.
The point that you said, about China, solely is the word that we need to put before that.
Agreed. Absolutely.
Solely. Otherwise, China looms very large in every calculation, and if we have to talk today to United States, it would be well to argue that, look, if you are going to privilege US-China relationship over us, that should be our subtext in any case, then what do you think we should talk to you about? That could be also another way of negotiating, but I'll be happy to answer.
Of course, I would say the other way around. Don't give them this choice, because when you look at an 11 trillion economy and a 2 trillion economy, you know what the choice is. The floor is yours. Okay, I have one hand there, the bearded gentleman, and here. And more, and you. Yes, we'll come to it. One very quick, small request. All of us have opinions. Let's cut to the bone, as the Americans say. Exactly what you want to know. Mic will work. It takes 2 seconds once you switch it on. Yeah, on karo, yaar. Yeah, it's on. I can hear it. यार देखो यार. Speak up. We are hearing you. We are hearing you fine.
Okay, I congratulate the author the third time. My name is Manik Gupta.
It's worth it. I think it's very valid.
My name
Please.
is Manik Gupta. I'm from PTI. So, Wipro, I guess a day ago, has actually filed this has filed its annual fillings where they have said that they think that American president and the America First policy is a potential threat. And this is the very first IT company who has come out and declared it out in open. Now, this is after when they have said that in next quarter, 60% of the workforce will come from US. And then Infosys is saying that in next 2 years, we'll hire 10,000 US people for the job. So now my question is this, that if someone working for Wipro now reads your book, will it help him calming up the nerves, or it will be the other way around?
You wanted to ask a question. Please.
I think so. My question, I put in a disclaimer, I'm not from an academic background. I work in a software company. My question is that at one level, when we are looking at US and India relationship, the challenge that we are facing in this relationship is that because you are not invested enough in these communities, in where we operate, that's my question.
There was somebody there, right? Hama? There. Because I'm in the lights and you're in the dark, I can't see you. So, yeah, please.
Thank you, sir. I am Sanjeev Srivastav, researcher on American foreign policy. My question would be to Dr. David Rashkina. Sir, you mentioned about India has not leveraged enough its democratic credentials, and which is very much respected in the United States, our shared values of democracy. So my question is that where are we lagging behind? What would be your recommendation? How can we leverage it enough? Thank you.
Thanks. So, Amiya, why don't you take those 2 questions? David will take the third one, and the rest of us can chip in if required. No, Mike, clearly.
That's fine. There was recent controversy, and that controversy is still going on H-1B visa. I must tell you, this is one visa. There was a common perception that Obama was very nice towards India on H-1B issue, and it's only when Mr. Trump has started coming, this problem has started. This is a myth. Obama was equally concerned about it, and he had also announced it was only after persistent pressure that he backed out. Now try to understand the politics behind it, about this software and hardware. Now, most of the BPO job India is doing, and the higher job is being done by the America. The people who are going there, it has been pointed out that $6 billion US they are taking annually, which they are not returning social security money. The Americans, 1,70,000 are working in India. They are getting their GPF, which they take away immediately. Now, that's not the issue. The issue is that America will start hurting itself in this process. Because of course, the companies will start saying that at this cost, we cannot be competitive. But what is more important is that most of the job, which is being done by Indian right now there, is going to go to the next generation of reform, that is robotics, artificial intelligence, and 3D mapping. And once this comes in, they do not know what to do. They have to again either come back to India or go back to Netherlands. So both of them are fast learner. So maybe this software and this IT is such a thing which has the advantage. The advantage is that in the food or the goods and the commodities, you can preserve it and eat it after some time. The services, you consume simultaneously the moment you are serving. So the result is immediate. The moment result starts declining because somebody in the world is becoming more important by using robotics and artificial intelligence, this will be put to no use. So Americans are not that fast learner in this sense as Indians and Dutch are. So they will again have to come back to India to saying that. So it's a different thing to go about the rhetoric. And he himself accepts that. He says, let me create a rhetoric. Let me see where do we finally settle down. That's the one issue. The next issue about the software is that the Indians or the Americans, both of them have to learn to go to the, what I say, the next generation reform, to go to a place where this is of a higher use. For example, India today requires USA in all smart city projects. What is that? This is a smart integrated grid system. Now, for example, we had been talking for ages that our traffic light will be such that once the car goes, it will go smoothly. Or it will be integrated in such a manner, if there are 50 cars here, then there is a 2-minute wait period. If there is 10 cars here, there will be a 30-second wait period. Or in the same manner, the lights will be such, the moment the sun starts going down, the lights will start coming out. It's night, it will be bright. The moment it starts getting morning, it will start getting phasing out. So these all are intelligent system integration. And the entire, it's happening in power, it's happening in telecommunication. We do not have that technology. If we do not have that technology, America wants to give it to us, we will say, I'm sorry, you are hurting me, I'm going to hurt you too. So we can take this technology from somebody else if you're not going to do that. And we have displayed that in the defense sector. When we went to Russia and we said that, sorry, boy, you are number one, but if you do not behave properly, we have other bats too. We have gone the aviation system to France, and we have taken 307. If Boeing, it's not mandatory that we have to buy Boeing. So we all are playing a game of the deal making. And in the deal making, we have lots of advantages. We are a market, we have a population, we have a competence, we have the potency where we can actually dictate them also in certain sector. The disadvantage we have is that we just account for 2% of their trade. They said, if you act tough, we will go somewhere else. But then we have to create, that's why this book recommends that how to go from this 2% to at least 300 to 400 billion dollar. That is the whole book. What was the second question?
Same question was
Community investment, possibly you were talking about. See, India has invested in human capital in America in a great manner. There is a study again by a university which says that the Indian community there are next to China in terms of science and technology, and the Chinese have stolen their most of the patents. India goes far below. And that's why he was acting tough against Chinese. But most important point is that the number of the Indian who are there, the number of engineering institutes or technical institutes opened in US, maximum by a country, it's by Indians who have gone there. So India have invested in a heavy manner in the political capital. If you're talking about the economic capital, possibly we are opening up, possibly we have placed our card on the table, possibly both of us need to go up and need to prioritize the sector. I have pointed out the sector, and what you are saying is absolutely right. We need to go in that direction.
There was a question on democracy.
Sure.
Harsh, maybe you would like to answer also some of it once, David.
Sure. Yeah, thanks for the question. I think the best example of how it was done was when the Prime Minister went to USA and spoke at Madison Gardens, if I'm not mistaken. Right. Now, that kind of high voltage rock star rally in India probably would flop, except in a couple of places in Mumbai or Delhi. In America, it was a great success. And if you recall, there were about, I think, 6 or 7 senators and congressmen. More? And some of them came on the stage. And they were lost. They had no idea what was going on because never in their lives had they seen a political gathering of that size and nature. Now, that probably made a greater impression on those senators and congressmen than any ream of briefing you might have written. And Trump is not immune to this. It's not directly relevant, but the example I can give you is what happened in Syria. Trump came into office, and even when he was in office, was totally against any international intervention, etc., etc. In fact, he almost bent over backwards on the South China Sea, as somebody pointed out. But when he saw those photographs of children affected by a chemical attack, it was a very different Trump who reacted. So there is an emotional connect which can be made.
Well, just on this point, I would just say that, democracy, yes, but it also puts us in a very difficult situation at times because I think leveraging democracy domestically in America is one thing, but leveraging democracy in global affairs is another matter, which I think India is not yet in a position to do. So on a number of fronts, and that's where I think a lot of these transactional elements will come. So next time when you vote in the UN Security Council, and you vote against, already we know that there is, how India votes creates a lot of tension back in America. And now I think there'll be a requirement that, look, you don't vote like this, then there'll be consequences, and those consequences may follow. So I think that element also becomes, when we are talking of transactional deals politically in foreign policy, those sorts of transactions will become more common, and India should be ready for that. I mean, if, for example, we are putting our cards on the table, then at times then we will have to make those tough choices, which I don't think we are very much used to, and we are not yet ready for.
Add something to that?
Well, thank you. Just a small point, Harsh. When Jean Kirkpatrick was, true neocorn, born from being a Democrat to a Republican, she used to be in the UN. And that was the time here we had a non-aligned summit, 7th non-aligned summit. 14 times we attacked the US by name in that summit.
Yeah.
I have those books.
Yes.
Shows my age, actually. But the reality is that for a long time, we insisted on a certain different path. And then we changed. So this change keeps happening. What I'm saying is, while we concentrate on a methodology of transactions, we need to keep a multiplicity, what we in JNU call as interdisciplinarity of approach. So why don't you also, promote who you are, because that's called marketing, and at the same time explain that we are not against you, we'll only help you. For example, the question on should Wipro be worried, should those companies be worried? No, this book actually helps them. He actually has a very straightforward, direct and engaging style of explaining and saying, well, you can do all of this, that can help. So there's room for disagreement, but he's only trying to help there. And they will be happy with it, I can tell you, to answer to your question.
That's a bad thing for consultants. If you start giving free advice or
Yeah.
advice at 400 rupees, it's terrible for consultants.
Yeah, it's going to cost him. It's going to cost him. All advice has been booked into one little book. But on the issue of democracy, I think promotion of democracy is a timeless value. And somehow it seems to me, Harsh, that we are that democracy. For me, democracy is a shield, not a fig leaf. And that matters to me. I don't know. I'm normally you're not used to saying just to me. I try to present evidence, but evidence exists that democracies do matter. Yes. And at some point, I think Mr. Trump can't do all the decisions himself. There will be a group of people who are also around him who will help him go through his presidency. And I think that will, in essence, quintessentially, from the time of Ronald Reagan and the Reagan Revolution, democracies, it's been a big thing. So I think Sanjeev's question, promote democracy.
Of course, for decades, we were happier with tin pot
But this
dictators.
is very important. I mean, a very serious scholar of international Indian foreign policy is saying that India should be promoting democracy. I think this is itself a big development. I've not seen many Indian scholars talking about India. I mean, Shakti would bear me out. There are not that many scholars in India who would say that India should be in the business of promoting democracy. And I think if we are seeing that shift in Indian attitude, then that should be welcomed. And I think that would help India in dealing with the Americans.
Yes, and as I said, for decades we were so happy in the hobnobbing with tin pot dictators and murderers and running down democracy to the embarrassment. I have 2 more minutes. No. Somebody who's young, I'm looking for younger faces. Our time, and I'll come back to you.
This is Ankit. So my question to you, sir, would be, how do you see American foreign policy with India in this context in the years to come? How do you see it in trade? How do you see it in defense? How would I know?
That's what we've been talking about actually, but okay. He can take a minute to say that. Right at the back. Very short question, please. And short question for you.
So to the author, you began with the remarks on the irony of this apostle of free trade tearing up international agreements. What about our own record in this regard, you know? Since when did we become advocates of free trade? And so Trump may be right in hard bargaining if he forces India to ease up. We are one of the most regulated countries on earth. So he might well be doing the right thing, you know.
There. Yeah, there, please. Right here. And I think that will be our last question.
Thank you very much. Very nice book you have written about it. My question is that Trump has, in his campaign, worked for masses. He lambasted the leaders and the system and everything what he can do it. And he showed that he can deliver the things for the interest of America. So he became a mass leader, whereas the media and the intellectual group is very deadly against him. If you see the CNN and other channels, both are making fun of each other. In such scenario, because when your people are not allowing you to work, the system is not with you. And then he doesn't have the proper, the ministers in the respective, sectors. So how can, and we have seen the 100 days also. So what is what do you see, that will he succeed in such scenario? And if so, what will be the stake of India? Because for India, he has got a soft corner.
Okay, thank you. Amiya, quickly, and then I'll wind up.
The first question was on free trade. Jagdish Nandan Bhagwati uses a very beautiful term. He says economic narcissism. He says we are staying in a state of economic narcissism where the trade between regions are increasing. Now, from the free trade, Adam Smith time, we went gradually where the protection was brought down and WTO was set up, and America was the biggest advocate of that. The World Bank studies shows that 75% of the trade in EU, probably 68% in USA, was towards the regional grouping. And the regional grouping was accounting for more than 75% of the trade. So whenever we used to advise some exporter to look for the exports, we used to say that first see what are the tariff barriers and what are the non-tariff barriers. Now, the problem with America now is that the non-tariff barriers are higher than the tariff barrier. Because tariff barriers we can still contest in WTO, which is thankfully alive. Non-tariff barrier becomes very difficult right now to fight for. The issue with USA is that it is against all kind of multilateralism. And to be honest, this is here where India is completely in sync with USA. Except WTO, we are also against all kind of multilateral things. But look at the facts very closely. That returns to your second question. What has Trump done? Trump nullified TPP. It was not ratified earlier. So he just did not ratify it, number one. Number two, he came and danced about China. He completely backed out and he's supporting China. Number three, now one of the book main motto, which is the art of the deal, is that deliver the goods. And he is being criticized for not delivering the goods right now. Now, the third part, what did he do, is that he's dancing about the Mexico right now, but he has also said that we are going to settle down with them as well. The issue, somehow he feels that the kind of polish or the suave which is required in international negotiation is little different from business deals, and that is what he's slowly getting dawned on him. And he's realizing, for example, with India also, he gave a mixed feeling. He says on the one hand, India is a great country during his campaign. Then he again equated that, it's denying job to its all US national. The moment he will realize that the losses which will be there by raising the H-1B visa and also by denying the entry, raising the fee of the H-1B visa and denying the entry of the people there is much more than which if he gives Clinton, the Obama backed out not because of any reason. He was more rabidly anti. He also wanted to raise H-1B visa fee. He also wanted to restrict the entry, but he realized that he's going to have more losses because of this. So once he has created this ruffle, the moment he will realize that no, this is not going to help America create the job or make it economically strong, he immediately backs out. But he says that as far as media is concerned, he had some good media, he had some bad media. You remember the CNN was denied entry, the other Washington Post was allowed entry inside. But possibly this is the early part of him. I personally feel, I do not know, they might differ with him. He is very hung on fight back. Fight back is a attitude. He said, I fought back and I gained it. Slowly, when he will realize, he's the first timer, he would realize he would possibly also come down to the level that his ultimate aim is the gains for the America and to minimize the losses. He will realize that by his act, the losses are more and the gain are less. Possibly he will be wiser.
We can hope so. We can certainly hope so. Now, before I wind up, I have a question to the audience. You asked us questions, right? Now, how many of you think that exports are good and imports are bad? No, just tell me. It's not a trick question. All of us, most of us believe very strongly that exports are good and imports are bad, right? Huh? No, fine. In other words, you think that the house you live in, the clothes you wear, the money you spend on education, the money you spend on food, the money you spend on healthcare and your holidays to Shimla or wherever, are not as good as the salary you earn. You export why? So that you can import. Exports are your earnings. Why do you earn? To spend money on yourself, right? So I'm not saying that imports are good and exports are bad either. I'm merely saying, please understand export imports in terms of ourselves, right? The work I do at Nehru Memorial for which I get paid money is my exports. Full stop. That's it. And exactly. And if a country is running trade deficit, it means that the world believes in you. So somebody is paying for the deficit. Right? It will be repaid in loans, it will be repaid, but ultimately, so, trade, the trouble is, and this is where politicians started, Clinton did it, Kerry used the word Bangalore for the first time in 2004 against George Bush. Obama started it, changed it. Because it's easy thing to blame. Like you blame outsourcing or globalization for loss of jobs in the US, but the loss of jobs is an account of technological change. Today, no senior executive, no executive in the USA has what we call in India a PA. You don't have a receptionist anymore. Machine does everything, right? That is the kind of change. You don't have a travel agents anymore. Jobs are being lost to technology. And once the full effect of 3D and robotics and the works are going to come in, you're going to have massive job losses in Europe, which is already happening. And that is something which will force politicians to become populist and to look for easy solutions when actually the solutions are far more difficult than they were in the past. So I'll close by saying, Amiya, thank you very much for writing this book. It is thought-provocative. I'm sure it will enable more people to think and write more and study more. I would definitely thank our three panelists for their really good contributions. Of course, all of you. But to leave you with the thought that the future is going to be a greater challenge than the past has been. This is something, I'm not being pessimistic, I'm merely saying, let's understand that and plan and try to think accordingly. Again, thank you all very much.
I'm personally obliged to the entire panel, sir. All of you who came here and really shared in fact, it's my privilege, it's my honor to share the dice with such illustrious persons. In fact, all of you are the great authority in their field. So thank you so much, sir.
Okay, thank you, Amiya, for calling me. And I had to read this book.